Uyghurs, the Uighurs, the Uighurs, the Uighurs, the Muslims in Western China. They're being put in concentration camps. Oh, it's just like in Nazi Germany, except that they're not being gassed, starved to death. They are trying to dissuade the Muslims from Islam, though, and for that, we should actually support the Chinese government. They're on their way out anyway. 150 years from now, I doubt very much China will still be communist. Communism never really lasts. Islam, whenever it takes root in a society, has to either be driven out or stays and continually takes over until the society is 100% Islamic. And so, consider it pragmatically. The Chinese have a choice. They can either allow Islam to take over the whole of China, and of course, the Uyghurs, they only want to have a separatist movement. They only want to carve off Xinjiang and have their own autonomous region where they can, just have Islam. It's not like, they would plan jihad attacks into main China. It's not like they would ever do that. Islam doesn't do that. Like in Pakistan, they don't do that to the Indians, and they haven't done that for 1,000 years. Still, the Uyghurs are being put into re-education camps, and the government's policy on a white paper recently released was to teach them Mandarin and to indoctrinate them into loyalty to Xi Jinping. If that's what they're actually trying to accomplish, I don't believe it is, but if that's what they're actually trying to accomplish, that's incredibly naive, because they can just say, oh yeah, sure, great, Xi is great, and I'm going to go back to plotting to kill the Kaffir. But I've got a hunch, because we're talking about Chinese communists here, that the whole white paper that's being put forth and all the dialectic they're employing about, we only want to teach them a language, we only want to make them good citizens and ensure that they can adjust, I'm pretty sure that's just propaganda for the West. Which is good, because, they're learning all the time how to get over on people anyway. At least they can learn how to get the white leftists off their back and keep them from screeching about human rights violations. Curious fact, by the way, it's the white liberals in the West that are screeching about human rights violations of these Muslims. Other Muslim countries do not care. They're not speaking out. They're not doing anything about it. There's not a big outcry from the Pakistanis or from Saudi Arabia or from anywhere in the Middle East. It's a complete unimportance to them. So it would seem that this is even going on. But try commenting that you support the Chinese anti-Islam policy. Anywhere online, you'll see very quickly that folks really, really don't like the idea of supporting the suppression of Islam. And they'll say, but you're just supporting these totalitarians, and but everybody, but the Chinese are so much worse, and they do all these bad things. How could you? Those poor innocent people. They don't have any real interest in why this started in the first place, because 6 years ago this was not going on. This was not a policy in China. As a matter of fact, I'm unaware of anything that really went on in China that was repressive of Islam as such until after the Kunming massacre in 2014, where about, I think it was 8 Uighurs went into a train station in the Uighur, in Kunming province area, and they knifed like 170 people and killed 38 of them. I'll say that again. They knifed 170 complete strangers because why? It wasn't government officials that they knifed. It wasn't policymakers that they knifed. It was ordinary civilians. The same way that in Paris, those refugee jihadis, Merkel's 9, or whoever they were, they came in, and within 2 years of entering as refugees, they picked up AK-47s, and they were castrating men at the Bataclan, and they were shooting people all over Paris, and they committed a big massacre. Oh, I wonder why that was. Was it government officials? Was it people that had something to do with the foreign policy? No. It's not about our foreign policy towards Muslims that causes this. It's about Islam. Islam causes its own violence. It gives its own impetus for violence. Despite anything that Kafirs do or don't do. Now, Christopher Hitchens talked about this on Bill Maher years ago, where he talked about, when the Caliph, the Sultan or whatever of like Morocco, North African area, he was sending out pirates, the Barbary pirates, to attack U.S. shipping vessels and kidnap people and make them slaves. And Jefferson went over there and tried to reason with the guy. Said, "Look, we've never done anything to you. Why are you bothering us?" And the Sultan said, "Because our book, the Quran, gives us permission to do this because you are infidels." It's a really good segment. If you ever, if you're a Hitchens devotee, you owe it to yourself to look it up. He's, very pithy, and he's got that deep English accent while he explains everything that goes on, kind of like a Richard Burton type, or perhaps Winston Churchill without the lateral lisp. Anyway, he's really good, and but no, he lays it out flat of what the real problem is. I think George Galloway is actually on the panel when he does that, if I'm not mistaken. It seemed like it was George Galloway. It looked like him many years ago. Anyway, the point is, it's no coincidence and it's no accident that every single place that Muslims go, eventually they get enough numbers so that they're emboldened, and they start picking fights, and they start making trouble, and they start murdering people to spread Islam. And it's the same thing everywhere. And that's not an accident. That's not an aberration. And that's not the fault of anybody but the Muslims. The Muslims come up with this idea on their own. It is their fault that they do what they do. It is part of Muslim teaching that they are to conquer the world, that they are to fight the unbelievers until there's no more fitna. Until no one is worshipping anything but Allah. That's their idea. That's what the Quran tells them that they are not only allowed to do, but commanded to do. They're to subjugate the entire world and put it under the dominance of Islam. Unfortunately, the Chinese, at least for now, are willing to try and dissuade these people through coercion. And that is morally correct, and it is practically correct. They are doing the right thing by doing this. Now, that's maybe a hard pill to swallow, but it is true. Islam is a bad ideology all around. It offers nothing good. It has offered no improvements of anything. It never gave anybody rights, except the Muslim men, to rape people and to murder people and to extort money from non-Muslims and to treat women like cattle. It gave them that right. Oh, and to rape children, of course. It gives Muslim men that right. But there is no equality of, people under Islam. There is no universal human dignity under Islam. Allah and the Muslim thinking, I'm not saying this is the Muslim way of looking at it. Allah does not necessarily love anybody. He is not necessarily going to save anybody. That's their teaching. Muhammad says, I do not know what will be done with you or with me, in reference to the salvation concept that they have. There's a hadith about that. I think it's Sahih Bukhari. And it is a fact. It is hard determinism in its approach to, free will or fate. And there's a ridiculous amount of sovereignty afforded to Allah that allows him to be just capricious. He's not bound by anything. He can do anything that he wants. One of the 99 names of Allah is the Great Deceiver. He's not a trustworthy character. Even if you assume that everything the Muslims say about him is true, there's no good reason to follow the guy.